computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Hello and welcome back to Sci-Fi Snacks. This is our 1-year anniversary episode. I'm so excited to hop on today and do this recording where we get to talk about a super fun story, very appropriately entitled Birthdays. Now, one of my biggest fans of the podcast is my brother, so I'm going to give him a shout out right now and say, hey. And let you all know that this is a story my brother has been hounding me to read for probably longer than this podcast has existed. And when I looked at my Google Calendar and it told me that Sci-Fi Snacks turned 1 year old on April 17th, which is today, I knew that the time had come. It was time for me to finally read Birthdays. So I went and I realized for the past 5 episodes, I've eaten cake in one form or another. And I never thought that I would say that I was a little burnt out on cake, but I was burnt out on cake. And I was like, birthday cake is what makes sense for this episode, right? But I didn't want it. And that made me really sad in some ways. But also, looking back now a little, a week after I've read and I settled on my snack, I could definitely eat more cake again. But how lucky am I that I have curated this life where I can get sick of cake? Hashtag first world problems, I guess. Man. So instead of birthday cake, I started searching for birthday cake flavored things. I know one of our local ice cream shops has birthday cake ice cream, but I can't, it's so strong. My youngest really likes that ice cream and I've tried it and I can't do that. So I ended up finding this really great blog and I'll link it in the show notes because this guy on the birthday of the blog every year does a different funfetti birthday flavored item. And when I saw the biscotti recipe, I was like, yes, this is perfect. I love biscotti. I've been making it myself for, over a decade now. I started when I lived in Alaska and didn't have access to a grocery store to just go grab whatever I wanted. I learned how to make biscotti. And if you have never had homemade biscotti, you need to try it because the sticks that you get at a coffee shop, the little individually packaged ones, I was always like, they're just so dry and hard. And why do people like this? Well, then I made it myself and I was like, oh, this is why people like it because it's delicious. So that link is in the show notes and you can go ahead and make some for yourself. It's really pretty simple. You have to cook it 3 times. So you kind of cook the log and then you cut them and then you cook it on one side for a little bit and then cook it on the other. So it's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it's not difficult. And all of the ingredients are, if you bake normally, it's almost all stuff that you've already got. So now on to the story. So like I said before, the title of this week's story is called Birthdays. This was written by Fred Saberhagen. Fred Thomas Saberhagen was an American science fiction and fantasy author most famous for his Berserker series of science fiction short stories and novels. Saberhagen also wrote a series of vampire novels in which the famous Dracula is the main protagonist, and a series of post-apocalyptic mytho-magical novels beginning with his popular Empire of the East series and continuing through a long series of swords and lost swords novels. Saberhagen passed away in 2007 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. This story, Birthdays, was originally published in Galaxy magazine. I did not write down the year, but I will link it in the show notes so that you can find the copy that I read online. It is a short story. I don't have an exact word count on this one. It is about 60 chapters. They're labeled chapters. They're not really chapters. They're very short little like vignettes, and we'll get into it. Kind of a short story in 60 pieces. It is definitely science fiction. There was some discussion actually on a blog about how is this generation ship science fiction? And we can get into why it is or isn't. There were people arguing on both sides. I thought it was kind of interesting that we were getting that granular, I guess, with the type. I guess some people are very, very specific about like the flavor of science fiction they want to read. And yeah, when I think about it, generation ship stories are definitely a big slice of that kind of thing. So the plot of this story is actually pretty simple when you're looking at it from a kind of high level. So we start off with, we are on this colonizing ship. Like I said, is it a generation ship? Is it not a generation ship? That detail is not actually that important. But what is important is that there has been some sort of disaster that has happened. And we meet our main character, who is 13 years old. His name is Bart. And he is the only known survivor as far as we can tell on this ship. Something bad has happened. The ship has told Bart that I've erased a lot of your memory because it was bad and you don't need to know. So we as the reader don't get to know either. And Bart has just woken up from some sort of like cryogenic sleep. And the ship lets him know that there has been a change in plans and that he is going to be a parent to the colonists of the new world that they're headed to. So then the ship introduces him to a group of 24 babies, kind of in this nursery being taken care of by robots who can take care of all of their, physical needs. So Bart plays with them for the day. He's kind of not really sure what's going on, but he hangs out with the babies. And then the ship is like, okay, now it's time to go back to your room and you're going to go to sleep and I'll wake you up next year. And Bart's like, what? Okay. And then he falls asleep and he wakes up and yeah, all of a sudden the babies look a lot bigger. They're obviously older. So it's a year later. This pattern then repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats for, what did I say, 60 something chapters? And every day Bart gets to see these kids and they are a year older and lots of stuff happens. This is your last chance before we get into any spoilers. In the end, these children end up being older than Bart. So Bart is aging one day at a time, whereas these children are aging a year each time. So all of a sudden they're 13 and Bart is still 13, and then they're 14 and Bart is still 13. And you see these relationships kind of grow and change. And we're getting all of these little snippets in these slices of what is going on with this group of 24 kids who are now not kids. And essentially they're trying to figure out, how do we get into other parts of the ship? Why are we here? Where are we going? All of those kinds of big questions. And it made sense in the beginning when Bart was like, oh, I'm going to be a parent, and Bart knew more. But then all of a sudden they're learning all these things and they know more. And Bart has kind of become the kid. And you see this slide into where Bart kind of lets go of any responsibility for these people because he's like, I can be the kid now. And it's very interesting to see kind of this sped up version of humanity here. And like Bart wakes up one day and then I think when the kids are maybe 16, 17, something like that, there's this huge fight and they've got factions and they kind of go crazy and they end up killing one of the kids. This part was a little unclear. I did try to reread it a couple of times. And by the time I read the end, it referenced that the kids killed the other kid. But there was this moment where the ship sent a robot and like just picked up this dead kid and then like threw it in the garbage disposal. And I was like, wait, what just happened? And the ship was like, I can dispose of and get rid of anybody. And that kind of like tamped down on that when they all realized their mortality, I guess, and the fact that the ship would just throw you in the garbage. So I was a little unclear for a minute, but then I kind of figured it out. So in the end, they don't really succeed in all of these attempts to get the ship to open up, to find out, where they're going, to get into the navigation parts, the bridge. They even try going like outside of the ship and around. 3 guys go out and then only one comes back. And he doesn't come back for like a year and a half or something. It's wild. And then we get to the end of the story and here is the twist. Bart wakes up. Bart has decided he no longer cares about these people, and they don't really seem to care too much about him either. They've all gotten really old. A good majority of them, I think, had died by this point, and they had kind of given up. And Bart wakes up on this last day, and the ship says, "That was your course in human psychology. Now, here are another group of babies made with the good genetic stock. And we're going to be at the planet in about 20 years or so. And you are to raise this group of babies." And we find that the whole thing was just a setup for Bart, who's only 13. He turns 14 at the end. It was very nice framing. I really liked that. It was like his actual real birthday in like the days that he was awake. The whole thing was just a training ground for him to understand what he needed to understand as a young teenager to do the best job he could in raising the chosen ones, the good babies. We had found out that the other group had been made from less than ideal genetic material. Like it wasn't bad, but like they were getting arthritis and different things. And they were like, we don't know what happened to the prime material, the unaltered genetics, because like they were all sterile too. Like they couldn't have kids on their own. They couldn't reproduce. And now we see why, because it wasn't about that. It was about Bart seeing all of the stages of human life play out so that he could take what he had learned and then grow up with these babies. And then at 14, he was going to be about, 34 by the time they get to the planet. And the babies would be 20 and they would all be ready to kind of, colonize and repopulate. There were a lot of things that I really, really loved about this story. And I think that it's tough for me sometimes reading older science fiction. I always kind of go in with a little bit of a like, what uncomfortable things am I going to encounter? And like, yes, there's definitely some dated language. There is some dated ways of describing women's bodies. Like I get what he was going for in terms of like, we're going to show the passage of time by talking about how this one female character is getting fat and cellulite and then wrinkles. And like, you could make other choices, but I get it. And it wasn't necessarily like egregious, so it didn't really bother me. What I did love, though, was that this story is a great, great example of what isn't said on the page. And I think that a lot of older sci-fi that I've read, and, obviously I haven't read everything, but it spoon feeds a lot more to you. You get these huge info dumps, and a lot of it is like, look at how smart I am with all my science. And this story didn't do that. This story was so character-based. And like, yes, it was all building to kind of this twist at the end, but it did such a good job of showing us one day every year, the birthday. They had decided like this is going to be our birthday every year. And it would show how relationships had changed, but it didn't, it was very deliberate in what it left out and what was in there. And I thought that it was really great how you could multiple people could read this story and come up with different ideas. I know I called my brother afterwards and I was like, hey, I really liked the part. Like there was totally cannibalism. And he was like, what? What are you talking about? And I was like, when the 3 guys left and then the one guy comes back and he does not talk about what happened to his 2 friends. And he lets everybody believe that like maybe they'll come back. But he'd been gone for so long. I was like, he totally ate his friends. And he was like a basket case afterwards. Like he used to look at the stars and now he only looks at the walls. And like, yeah, I think he ate his friends in order to survive. Who knows? We don't know. We can't know. It's not on the page. Maybe I've just been reading too much horror lately that's where my brain went. And not like, oh, okay, they were killed and it was bad. But like somehow he made it back. What I like about all of that, though, is that the author didn't feel the need to give us all the answers. Because in the end, the general theme of this story, the answers, those things weren't important. What was important was what Bart could see in how people reacted to each other, in how they created religion, how they created meaning through art, how they grew the garden and then were like, yeah, the ship just couldn't give it all to us because like only humans can do this. But like not everybody believed that. And like all of those things that Bart did see were the important things at the end of the day. And I also really loved how we still felt connected, even though this was structurally a story that could get monotonous very easily. Like he wakes up and it's a birthday. And a lot of us, your birthday comes once a year. And so things like having birthday cake, having a party, this story could have been 60 birthday parties. That would have been awful, in my opinion. Thankfully, it was not 60 birthday parties. You got to see a lot of interesting, like, why they didn't choose to do parties. And then when they did choose to do parties, how were they different in different ages? And so we were still connected through the main character's experience. So it didn't get monotonous. We had these touchstones and it didn't always feel linear either. There were things like the relationship that Bart had with these kids who then grew up in front of him. There were times where you could tell that by whatever was going on with that group of kids, when they woke up, they were waiting for him a couple of years. And then certain years, nobody was waiting for him and they could almost care less. Like it was almost like they forgot he existed. And then, after one of the years, they try to break him out and wake him up and, quote, save him. And the ship ends up moving him to a totally different part of the ship because the ship is like, that's not the plan. This is such a good example of how in your story, your antagonist doesn't have to be a bad guy. It just has to be set with a different goal from your protagonist. And you could very easily see this, if this story were from the point of view of one of the 24 test colonists, test babies, you would think that they were the good guys and they were right, when really their whole lives were just in service to this one child's lesson. If you look at it from that perspective, you're like, wow, the ship is clearly the antagonist here because the ship does not care. It was really interesting. There were these clues along the way that the ship isn't helping us with our bad teeth or with this. Like the ship is just doing enough to keep us alive, but not giving us answers and not helping us. And it's like, yeah, because you don't need the answers. You just need to live your life in view of this child who is the important one, which is wild when you think about it. So yeah, that was really, really cool. And I think I learned a lot about story structure in reading this. And one of the most surprising things for me was, and this is probably because I've been doing this deep dive into short stories and into structure, I guessed the ending before it happened. And like, Yes, we all know that person who you're watching a movie and like 10 minutes in, they're like, I know the ending. And you're like, shut up. I don't want you to spoil it. I never guess endings, ever. And I don't know. As soon as the kids were older than him, I was like, oh, I can see the pattern. I was like, here's the deal. He's not meant to be their parent. The ship said, you're supposed to be a parent of the first colonists. As soon as they were older than him, I was like, they're not the first colonists. I don't know what they're for. They're probably just for him to learn how to be a parent because he's 13. How's he supposed to take care of anybody? You know, it said in the 13 chapters leading up, it was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not a parent. How am I supposed to raise these children? Also, how am I supposed to do that one day a year? You're not. That's the whole point. And I could see all the clues that had been laid, and I saw the pattern, and I was like, I know where this is going. And then the rest of the story was interesting, yes, but I was rushing a little bit because I was like, I need to know if I'm right. And then I was, and it was really exciting. And then I asked my brother too. I was like, hey, at what point did you guess the ending? And he was like, I didn't. That's why it was so cool. And I was like, oh man, I totally did. But I still think that there are a lot of books that I can't guess the ending. But the more I read and the more I read to analyze stuff, I think it's going to happen more and more often. And in some ways, it's a little sad. But in other ways, it's kind of fun. It's like putting together the puzzle and then just guessing. I still don't think that I will ever, I never say never, but like murder mysteries, forget it. I never guess the right person because mystery writers, I bow down to you. You are so good at like the red herrings and stuff, and I fall for it every time. So I still don't think I'm going to be catching any serial killer murderers, but I can guess the ending of some short stories if they are set up like this, where they're giving you all of those intentional Easter eggs and hints and clues. Another thing that I learned that I could reread this story and really kind of lean into and study is that large groups of people in a story is really difficult, especially in a short story, because we have 24 babies, 12 girls, 12 boys. We have our main character, Bart, and we have the ship, and we have various robots. Now, the robots are all just kind of like, you know, NPC plot devices. Like none of them have character. The ship is a character very clearly, but the ship is an enigmatic character that you're not meant to really understand. It's just kind of there and kind of frustrating. Bart is your touchstone, your point. We're in Bart's brain, so that's kind of the how we keep everything here. And then using our main character, we see the relationships that he builds with key people. So even though we know that there are 24, I don't think we ever got all 24 names. We might have throughout, but I'd have to like go digging and look up. But like there were like 3 or 4 women and then 3 or 4 guys who were kind of like the main ones, because those were the people that Bart had the stronger connections with. And so in the end, it didn't really matter anyway, because Bart was the main character and everyone else was, in fact, just a lesson for him. I wrote in my notes, it was really funny. I was like, they really were NPCs. Bart had real main character energy, which was really funny. So I really enjoyed this story. I had a great time. I hope you all have been having a wonderful time listening to me chat about stories and snacks on the podcast over the past year. And this is the time where I tie it back to my snack. I think that the unintentional connection here, other than birthday cake, well, birthday cake was intentional. So the unintentional connection where we're testing our creative thinking skills here is how birthday cake could be considered something monotonous. And I was not looking forward to having cake again because I was, you know, having so much cake week after week after week on the podcast. So I changed it up. I made something different. And throughout this, Bart changed things up. He made it different. Sometimes they had a big party. Sometimes they didn't acknowledge the birthday at all. And that's how I'm connecting Birthday Cake Biscotti to birthdays, the short story. Before we wrap things up, I want to make sure to remind you to subscribe on whatever channel you are listening. Go ahead and take this time while we are on hiatus to listen to the backlist. And then let me know what stories you want me to read and talk about next. Who knows? Maybe I'll get a little bored and want to drop another bonus episode while I am planning and recording for our next season, which will drop later this year, on speculative poetry. So reach out on social media. I am at Liz J. Bradley on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram. And you can also send an email. Don't send me spam. Don't send me AI slop. But send me stories. I would love to read your favorite story. And if I really, really like it, maybe I'll make a bonus episode. So reach out on email at sci-fi snacks pod, that's POD, @gmail.com. Thank you again for spending time with me today. Bye.